We are better off in our financial planning if we do our estate planning while we're alive instead of waiting for our death, regardless of when we die. It's true whether we die tomorrow, whether we die in 10 years, 20 years, 50 years. We don't even need to know the date of our death to do good estate planning today. So that's a situation where we can optimize for a known trade-off. Thank you very much. Today we are going to talk about false precision and financial independence. Quick disclaimer, I can't give anyone individualized advice in this discussion, but we can talk about a lot of really cool issues, talk about academic debates, tax debates, FI debates. So let's have at it. I am opinionated, right? So just so we're all aware, I have opinions and that's great. You should do your own analysis. The answer to the question should never be, well, Sean Mullaney said, right? That's a terrible answer to any financial planning question. So you do your own analysis and know that I am opinionated. So false precision. This is not a trick question. Just shout it out. What do these years have to do with Sean Mullaney? How many parents do I have? Yes, these are the years that my grandparents were born. And as you can see, they were born relatively close in time in human history, right? 1916 to 1922. All right, so that actually makes their financial planning real easy, right? All we got to do is get a mortality table, get some computer software, our favorite online calculator, and we're done, right? It's going to spit out a financial plan. They're going to get to financial independence. Isn't it great that we're in 2024? There's this great computer software. We're good to go. Their financial planning is so easy, right? Just one more thing. When did my grandparents actually pass away? Well, let's check. Would you look at this for a sec? My grandparents passed away in the year 1978, 1988, 2006, and 2019. That means that 4 similarly situated individuals who were born basically at the same time in human history passed away in 4 different decades over 5 different decades. Reality does not match computer printouts. We cannot ascribe to computer software financial planning. We just can't do it. A financial calculation requires an end date, okay? And sometimes we can guess it, but you couldn't get a mortgage. It wouldn't exist if there wasn't an end to the term, right? You have to have an end date in order to do any financial calculation. However, there'll be things that say you have a 97% chance of financial success in retirement, or you need $200,000 to fund your healthcare in retirement. What is that? That's false precision. It's meant to make you feel all warm and fuzzy, but it's false precision. How much do each of these people need in medical expenses? They're all born at the same time, and it wildly varied, right? But we ascribe to some of this computer software, this online calculation, false precision. My thesis is it's time to stop doing that. Well, you say, well, wait a minute. So do we just leave CampFI? We can't do financial planning in our own life? Are we just done? Well, I'm gonna give you a different paradigm that accounts for these unknowns, right? We don't know our date of death. We don't know the annual stock and bond market returns. We don't know our annual spending, yet we give these tools false precision. Not that we can never use these tools. That's not my message. It's that we shouldn't invest false precision in those tools. So I believe we have an alternative framework that we can use to do our own financial planning, whether it's DIY or with an advisor. You do you. I believe what we ought to be doing is optimizing for known trade-offs. And I'm going to give you some examples. And actually, the previous speaker gave us our first example, right? Estate planning. We have a known trade-off there. We can do our estate planning today while we're healthy and we're with it, and we can control the process. We can pick the lawyer. We can pick the outcomes. Okay, that's one option. Or we leave it to our death and our loved ones get to do it when we're not in the picture. There's a trauma going on. There's whatever state law going on. That's a known trade-off. We are better off in our financial planning if we do our estate planning while we're alive instead of waiting for our death, regardless of when we die. It's true whether we die tomorrow, whether we die in 10 years, 20 years, 50 years. We don't even need to know the date of our death to do good estate planning today. So that's a situation where we can optimize for a known trade-off. The estate planning and the lawyers are going to get paid somehow. I would rather cut out the lawyers. And the best way to cut out the lawyers is to do it up front. Yeah, they're going to get us a cut, but it's going to be a much smaller cut. So let's do that up front and make money that way. I'm going to dive into two tax topics to illustrate sort of the known trade-off paradigm. So our first example is Joe and Jane. They're married, right? They make approximately $300,000 a year. That puts them squarely in the 24% marginal federal income tax bracket, right? Every dollar they put into a traditional 401k, that's going to yield them 24 cents on the dollar in terms of a federal tax savings. In Colorado, I believe, is 4.4%. Correct me if I'm wrong. So that's 28.4 cents on the dollar if they happen to live in Colorado. So that's the trade-off today. That's the benefit today. Well, let's examine the known trade-off here, right? So you do a traditional retirement account. You get a benefit on the marginal dollar for the whole 401k contribution, traditional deductible, 24%. Great. But there's a price to be paid, right? When we get into retirement, we are going to have to take that money out. Maybe we do Roth conversions. We could talk about that later. But at some point in our retirement, we're probably going to have to pay the piper. Well, there's something called effective tax rate, and we have progressive tax brackets. So when we take that money back out in retirement, it all doesn't just go against the 24% bracket. Some of it might even go against the standard deduction. That's the 0% bracket. You say there's no such thing as a 0% tax bracket. Well, there is the standard deduction. If the only thing you took was income up to the standard deduction, you just pay a 0% tax. Then you have the 10% bracket, the 12% bracket, then the 22%, and eventually the 24% bracket. The dirty little secret is in retirement, for most Americans, even affluent Americans, it's very tough to get back up here. So we took a deduction at 24%, and then we take the inclusions back at 0%, 10%, 12%. That seems like a pretty good known trade-off. But you say, Sean, what about tax hikes? Well, I say, okay, that's a fair point. But a 50% tax hike in the 10% bracket would get that to 15%. Do that here, 12% goes to 18%. Yes, at 22%, we'd eventually get to 33%, but that's stress testing. And do we really think the politicians are going to do 50% tax hikes? Not if they don't. If they want an early retirement, if they come to CampFI and they're like, oh, we love this early retirement, then maybe. Otherwise, probably not. All right, and we can do planning, right? So remember, Joe and Jane got 24 cents on the dollar on the way in. Maybe Joe and Jane can get to 66 years old and they're married, they're retired. What they do is they mostly live off long-term capital gains. They have taxable portfolio, and they have brokerage assets. They sell those assets to fund their lifestyle. That generates $45,000 of long-term capital gain. They've got some dividends, some interest. If they do nothing else at this point, they would actually pay zero federal income tax. But could they do something else? Yes, they could do a Roth conversion. And here's one example. They could do a $60,000 Roth conversion in my example. And you say, well, okay, so they'll pay what, 10% or 12%? Isn't that what the other slide said? Well, let's check. They actually only pay 5.17% because they take some of that against the standard deduction, some against the 10, some against the 12. So Joe and Jane could have 24% on the way in, take a deduction, and then in retirement, they pay 5.71. Why are they not doing that known trade-off? Right, and yeah, maybe this will be 8%, maybe this will be 7%, 6%, 9%, who knows? But that's a pretty good dang trade-off in my opinion, right? We take the deduction in our high working years, we get to retirement, our income's artificially low, 24% versus 5.7%, they're making money off the IRS. All right, well, you say, but not everybody does tax planning, and that's true. So I'm going to stress test it. I'm going to give you a horrible example. This is like financial planner world nightmare. We have a 75-year-old couple. They've got $3 million in traditional IRAs, all deferred. That's the worst outcome ever. There's nothing worse in the world than $3 million in a traditional retirement account. And they're going to do something verboten. They're going to take more than their so-called required minimum distributions. You're going to hear a lot of content about how horrible RMDs, required minimum distributions, are. That's a forced distribution out of your retirement account. So I have this couple taking more. They take $150,000. That's actually more than they're required to take. So they are going to get crushed by taxes in retirement. This is the worst thing ever. That 24%, that was a terrible thing to do. Well, what does their tax picture look like? With no planning, they should have done planning. With everything, their effective tax rate is 15.44%, right? They did no planning. They're the worst structure ever. And on these traditional retirement accounts, their effective rate, and this includes the so-called dreaded IRMA, 15.44%. So again, that's a known trade-off. 24% on the way in, 15.44% on the way out. And oh, by the way, this is a stress test. How many of us are going to have $3 million in a traditional retirement account? Probably not too many of us. We're probably going to do planning before this, but even if we don't, ain't too bad of an outcome. That's optimizing for a known trade-off. Well, all right, let's summarize this, right? So we don't know everything about the future, but we do know a few things. We know the tax rate today, right? That we can, Dr. Google can tell us what that is. The other thing we know is that American taxation has historically been progressive. That's this thing, right? We don't just say everything's taxed at 24%. We say there's the 0, the 10, the 12, 24, 20, 22, 24, and on and on. And in retirement, we're probably not going to get too much higher than this 12. Maybe we get to 22. If it's really bad, maybe we get to the 20, 24. All right. I've got another known trade-off situation. Oftentimes you'll hear, well, what's the optimal traditional taxable Roth, right? That's a valid question. And I would argue there is no optimal 30% in this bucket, 40% in that bucket, 30% in that bucket. But we can optimize for known trade-offs. So let's think about a Roth 401k at work, right? Not a terrible thing. Every dollar that we contribute at work to our Roth 401k plan is a dollar we can't deduct today, right? Because they share a limit. This year, for under 50 years old, the limit is $23,000. So if we want to do a Roth 401k at work, that's fine, but there's a real trade-off. There's a real opportunity cost there. We lose 24 cents on the dollar. In the other example, you have to look at your marginal rate. But as long as you're paying 10% or more, there's a real trade-off there. All right, well, that's the Roth 401k. But there's a second Roth out there, as you probably know. That's the Roth IRA. And the Roth IRA is a little different from a trade-off perspective, because for most of the accumulators in the room, the way the rules work, this isn't 100% true, but this tends to be, especially in the FI community, 90% true, maybe more. Every dollar that we put into a Roth IRA is a dollar we could not have deducted into a traditional IRA. Most of the folks in the room who are still accumulating cannot deduct a traditional IRA contribution. Like I said, not 100% true, but likely 90+% true based on the tax rules. So I have one Roth account where I trade a deduction to get it into the Roth. I have another Roth account where I don't trade a deduction to get it into the Roth. Which one would you pick, right? I would pick the Roth that doesn't require me to sacrifice a tax deduction. So in conclusion, we cannot over-rely on false precision, right? We can absolutely use calculators, we can use spreadsheets, but we can't ascribe to them false precision. And second, there's a better way, and I believe optimizing for known trade-offs is out there. We talked about it on the estate planning side. We talked about it at work when we have a 401k. We probably should be doing that known trade-off because we deducted a marginal rate that's usually the highest we'll ever pay. And then on the way out, we get to run up through those brackets, maybe even get the standard deduction. And then when we're thinking about Roth IRA versus Roth 401k, they sound the same, but they're not from a trade-off perspective.
Roth 401k is much more expensive than a Roth IRA. So yeah, let's do some Roth. I'm all for doing some Roth, but we probably should do it with the Roth IRA since we don't have to sacrifice a tax deduction for doing so. Thank you very much.